Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you part one of my two-part review of the new Tamron 24mm F2.8 DI3, which means it's made for mirrorless, OSD, which refers to optimized silent drive, the focus system, and then it is M1:2, which means it has a 1:2 life size or 0.50 magnification macro capability. And so we're going to take a look at this lens today, and in this first part I'll both give you a look at the build and the design, the features of the lens. We're also going to take a look at the autofocus performance and how it does both for stills and for video usage. In our second part of the review series that will be coming to you in a week, we will take a look at the image quality, also the video quality, some comparisons, and I'll give you a final verdict as a part of that episode, so stay tuned for that. We have a 20mm, a 24mm, and a 35mm f2.8 lens. We have the 24 and the 35mm already released, and I actually have both of them on hand right now, and so I'll give you a look at that. So we're going to start by going hands-on and looking at the design elements and the features that go into these lenses. Let's take a look. So let's take a closer look at the 24mm f2.8. And so as you can see, this is quite a compact lens, though fairly squat in its design. Part of that is an attempt to preserve a common design element in that all of the lenses that Tamron has so far announced for Sony, be they zooms or these prime lenses, all have a shared 67mm front filter thread. Now, some people might view it as a negative, the fact that this maybe has a larger than necessary front filter and thus body. However, if you're wanting to invest in one filter lineup, it is obviously quite an asset to have a shared filter thread. So I would say it weighs to me it weighs out as a more of a net positive than net negative, because it's still a nicely compact lens. So as you can see, both the 24 and the 35mm lenses are almost identical in size here. And so, visually they're distinguished above all by the unique lens hood for the 35mm, which gives you almost a anamorphic cutout type look, and also is threaded here so you can use filters right on it. But other than that, they do bear a lot of similarities. And so while this is a very lightweight lens, as we pull it off here, you can see in the hand, very small, it is built around some positive things. We've got a very, very lightweight metal lens mount. We do have a gasket here along with 4 seal points inside. There's fluorine coating on the front element, and so some quality of construction. It feels like nice grade engineered plastics here. There's just the tiniest bit of flex when I squeeze it, but it's not high grade, but it feels nicely made at the same time. The lens does come with a pedal-shaped, shallow pedal-shaped lens hood that bayonets tightly into place. There is no locking mechanism, but it locks on there nice and tight, and so I see no cause for concern. Now you'll note that right now the front element is recessed a little bit. What you'll find is that during focus it will move forward and backward within the housing, but at no point does it even come close to the front limits of the travel, so it's always going to be well behind if you're using a filter, and never kind of any issue of hitting that front element. This is of course focused by wire. It uses Tamron's OSD or optimized silent drive focus motor. Moving beyond that, just to give you some of the specifications, the lens is only 215 grams or 7.6 ounces. So, we're talking about truly, truly small. The diameter is 73 millimeters here, and of course 67mm filter size. The length is 64 millimeters or 2.5 inches. And so, nice and short there. There are 7 rounded aperture blades. Maximum aperture is f2.8. Minimum aperture is f22. Now, of course, the kind of signature feature of these lenses that does set them apart, other than being small, light, and relatively inexpensive, is their ability to focus down very, very closely. And so in this case, you can focus down to 0.12 meters, 4.7 inches. But remember, of course, that on this particular Sony body here, there's a mark here on either side that shows where the actual sensor is located. So when we're talking about 4.7 inches, we're talking about just a little bit in front of the lens itself. And so, you can focus down very closely, but of course you will have to deal with the potential for shading. You may need to remove the lens hood if you're going to get down that close. So this lens has 10 elements in 9 groups, and that does include some, higher end elements, including some LD, low dispersion elements, and GM, glass molded as spherical elements. It also has Tamron's B-bar coatings on it to help to resist with flare. And so, for a price of $349 in the US market, while it isn't high grade, it's a fairly, simple, straightforward design. Internally, they've got some good stuff going into this lens. So as you can see, we've got a fairly simple, straightforward lens design. Really the standout here being that we do have nice weather sealing with the gasket, internal seals, and flooring coating on the front element. No switches or anything on the barrel, so it's simple. However, it is effective and very lightweight and compact in build, even though it's probably a little bit wider than what it needs to be. Remember that 67 millimeters is the filter size that is shared with the 24mm F1.4 G Master lens from Sony, which has a full 2 stops faster maximum aperture. That goes to tell you that you probably didn't need a 67mm filter on this lens uniquely. However, that common design element, common philosophy of design in these lenses is also one of the selling features, and the fact that you can have one set of filters and use it across any of these FE lenses that Tamron is releasing for Sony. Now, the second element here is the OSD, or Optimized Silent Drive. And as has been the case in my reviews of the 17 to 35 millimeter f2.8 to 4 OSD lens from Tamron, along with the 35 to 150 millimeter f2.8 to 4 OSD lens, in both of those reviews, I found that the OSD was the weak link. And that's a little less true here, in that there are, in those lenses, there's the major shortcoming, for example, of not being able to have, manual override. Well, here you can certainly use the lens in DMF mode without any kind of issue, and you have all of the various, hybrid focus options available, and so including DMF. And so if I want to override focus, I can do that at any point. And so it's a little bit better implemented here than what it was in those lenses. However, there is still a bit of a shortcoming that I want to highlight when it comes to that. So we've got 2 elements that we're going to look at. One of those is that in terms of focus speed, in most situations focus speed here is good, but focus speed, you can tell when making a major focus change, is not as fast as what the RXD drives are on the zooms, like either the 17 to 28 millimeter or the 28 to 75 millimeter. They're definitely faster. They're also quieter, as we're going to see. And so, of course, some sounds, some clicking being a part of the focus that makes it not quite as smooth and as refined as those RXD motors, or on, some of the linear motors found on some of the Sony alternatives. So we're going to look at a couple of things. First of all, we're going to just take a look at some actual focus results for stills photography with some commentary on that. After that, we'll take a look at video. So let's jump in and let's look at that stills results. Let's start with a landscape scene. One of the issues that I often have run into with wide-angle lenses when shooting on mirrorless is that sometimes in various kinds of conditions, they don't like to focus at landscape distances, and even at smaller apertures like f5.6, there can be a little bit of pulsing or hunting. Fortunately, that's not an issue with the 24mm f0.51, as you can see here at f2.8. First of all, as you can see, we've got great image quality, even though it's in the midst of a snowstorm, and so there's lots of stuff going on here, but I had no problems with focusing at this distance, and that was true if I shot at smaller apertures as well. Now, of course, the nice option here is that you have the alternative to then turn, which I did in this same scene, and shoot a, kind of a macro detail right there, or really technically a micro detail compared to the larger macro scene. And so you can see here that focus was equally good when focusing on these, dried up weeds, essentially, that are in the ditch there where I was standing and shooting. And so certainly a nice plus there as well. Once again here, I wanted to get the snow that was sitting on this evergreen branch, and you can see that focus here is quite good. You can also see that contrast and detail at f2.8 is quite excellent. Now here is a close focus shot, and in this case I was trying to get just this little bit here, which I did manage to get, and so you can see good detail on the inside of the, the dragon's tongue here sticking out of the orchid. Now the one focus negative that I did encounter on a couple of occasions was when trying to shoot a foreground object, which you can see here on the right with correct focus. And so instead it wanting to grab background focus. And so in this case it was, particularly true when having all focus points engaged, so there's a lot of the scene for it to choose from. But this was on the A9, which obviously is a fantastically good has a fantastically good focus system. And so even there were a few occasions where I had to just kind of narrow down a focus point, and usually by overriding, by putting my thumb on the LCD screen and selecting kind of a flexi point in the area where I wanted to focus, which was obviously here. And so after doing that, I got good focus, but the one negative in terms of stills that I encountered was running into that every now and then. Now here was a shot, obviously, that I really liked. I liked kind of the, the tension between the foreground subject and the background tree and the angle in which I shot. But more importantly here, it's about the quality of focus, and you can see here that it did a great job of focusing here on the foreground, on the subject that I wanted to focus on, leaving the rest of the scene nicely out of focus. So we'll finish up this focus section by looking at a series of, very casual type portraits. And so in this case I had my wife take the shots, and so I wanted to see how IAF worked even with someone who's not a professional. And so what I did is I did two series, one with the sun is back here at my back, and so I've had to raise the exposure here because my face would have been in shadow, and then moving back at a total of 3 different focus distances to see how IAF did. So here in the closer focus distance with a wider focal range or focal length like this is maybe the easiest for IAF to work in. And so you can see it did a very good job of grabbing the eye, even being fairly strongly backlit. Now in this second scene, we can see that focus in fact did not grab the eye. And so as you can see, I'm actually out of focus, and what is behind me from the wall back to this tree is in focus. And so in this case, IAF did not do its job. And finally, at this focus distance, my wife noted that wasn't necessarily picking up the eye so much as a face at this point, which is not unusual with a wide angle lens. What we can see, however, is that focus is accurate, and that we got IAF, or focus, back to where it needed to be. Now in this second series, it's much better lighting, as you can see. I'm not backlit, but rather I am more front lit, or side lit, more technically, from the sun over to the right. And so you can see here at the closest focus distance, IAF did perfect, no problems there. Now fortunately, in our second shot of this scene, IAF is also perfect, and so this is kind of the focus distance where we failed before. Not a problem here, we got a good quality of focus. Now on our final shot, again, it was a situation where, it wasn't getting an eye any longer, but it got the face, and at this focus distance, that's all you need. And so although my eyes are not open at the time of the shot, what we can see is that focus was accurate. And so overall, other than one, misstep and maybe a kind of extreme example, we can see that IAF did its job. So as you can see, overall, good results. Just in a few situations, I did have a little bit of stubbornness when something was close, getting it to focus on that rather than in the background. You can always help to refine that process by, rather than having all points active, to go down to narrower focus points. That happens less often when you're doing that. So the other thing that I noted is when it comes to video performance. So the first thing that we'll take a look at is taking a look at the sound when it comes to doing focus pulls. So let's take a look at that. So as you can see, you can hear some light clicking at occasions when making those focus shifts. Something about, as it begins to drive focus, there's a little bit of a clicking noise from that OSD, which Optimized may be silent, not so much. But you know, at the same time, I don't want to be too negative here because the focus pulls were confident. There was no settling or pulsing. We got to where we needed. There was just a little bit more sound than what I would like. Now, unfortunately, not in every situation did I have that complete confidence. And so, for example, when it comes to exaggerating that sound, when I was doing some closer work for another video, where fortunately I didn't need the audio from the camera because, you know, I record separately to a mic, but I'll show you some of the footage from the camera itself, and you can hear that when it's making constant focus shifts, you know, reacting to a subject there's definitely more noise involved. The other thing too that I noticed that I'm not thrilled about is when I was shooting one of my static sessions, and you know, it was a backlit situation, but I had plenty of front light to compensate for that, and so you can see that my face is illuminated just fine. But what I did find is that unlike the RXD lenses, which I have found, I use the 28, I'm using it at the moment, actually the 28-75 is my most commonly used video lens because it's very steady, there's almost no settling or pulsing, it does a great job for this kind of work, and of course it's a flexible lens, and so it does great for that. It wasn't as great. I used the 35mm, not the 24mm for that particular one, but it's a similar phenomena where there can be just a little bit of movement back and forth that you can see here, where it's not just kind of picking a focus point and staying there. Now, at the same time, when it comes to shooting footage, here's a look at shot on a gimbal, and I'll show you a lot more video footage in our next episode, but you can see here that focus is actually doing a good job of moving to the various focus areas that I wanted, and it's, you know, not obvious or grotesque. It's moving smoothly through that. So on a gimbal, I actually found focus to be quite good. I was very happy with the video results that I got when shooting on a gimbal, and so no major complaints on that, and I'll give you more on that next week. So, you know, focus is just, I would say, is the weak link of the formula here, in that it actually is good, but of any area that I might criticize, it is the most likely area to receive criticism, mostly because of a little bit of extra noise, particularly for video work, and, you know, and then in a few occasions, only when doing video, not wanting to quite settle as smoothly as what I would like, which of course is exaggerated by the clicking as you move back and forth. And so if you would like to see more photos from the lens in anticipation of taking a look at the image quality and the final verdict, I recommend that you take a look in the description down below. I do have a linkage to an image gallery with a variety of photos there, both taken up very close and then also in a bigger distance. So take a look at those. There's also buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself, and of course at $349. This is a nicely moderately priced lens. It actually has a fair bit of bang for your buck. You know, so long as you don't need a wider maximum aperture than f2.8. And so we'll examine in our image quality segment whether or not, you know, f2.8 is enough in this situation. Maybe it's not enough for everyone in every situation, but what we do need to see is great performance, even wide open. So we'll take a look if it achieves that in that next episode, so stay tuned. In the meantime, if you look in that description, you can also find linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron, or to sign up for my newsletter. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.